Hello and welcome. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. And this session is put your business on autopilot with scheduled tasks. Originally, I was going to cover put your business on autopilot with Claude CoWork. That is still what I'm going to cover. However, Anthropic has released new functionality in the chat side of its product that allows you to schedule tasks. You could not do that before, and that was a primary reason to use CoWork. So I'm going to cover both, how to set up scheduled tasks in both chat and CoWork, and why you would choose one or the other, because they are just a little bit different. If you don't know me, my name is Anna Burgess Yang. I am a solopreneur operations expert. So I focus on everything that runs behind the scenes of a solo business. So the tools you use, automations you set up, workflows, anything that keeps your business running, and specifically what keeps it running smoothly. I am also a freelance content marketer and journalist. I write for a lot of tech companies. I have a background in financial technology and also write quite a bit about automation and AI. And before that, I was a tech executive at a financial technology company. I was there for 15 years, and I was their product manager. So a lot of my job was looking at not only how could the company's product be better, but also how could the different teams that I work with function more efficiently in our internal processes. And so that gave me the background that when I formed my own business several years ago, that was one of the first things I did, was set up tools and automation, because I knew that with only me and my bandwidth, I needed to make things run in the background. And that's one of the reasons that I love scheduled tasks in Claude, is so that things that are repeatable just kind of happen. And I can go in and review the end result rather than just moving things around manually or doing things manually. So, what we're going to cover in today's session: how do you figure out what to automate? That is kind of a baseline of where we're going to start. Is figuring out what you can put on a scheduled task, how these scheduled tasks work, what they do, and how they run, both in chat and in CoWork. The difference and why you would choose one over the other for setting up your scheduled tasks. Then I'm going to show you how to set up a scheduled task, where to click, what to do, the instructions to give so it can just run. And also where to store your reference files. This is a big one. Reference files, I use that term to say any type of file that tells Claude about your business or about your brand or about the way that you work. And some of those might be referenced between multiple scheduled tasks. It's the same information. So you have to have kind of a central location where your scheduled tasks can call these files and that they're easy to update. So first, determining what to automate. And this is, I think, a hard process if you're not used to doing that. So the way I think about automation, and in this case, automation, I'm talking about a scheduled task, is that a scheduled task really only works if it follows the same sequence of steps each time. If there is a decision that has to be made, and what AI people like to call a human in the loop step, that's not good for a scheduled task. You want these things to run in the background without your interaction. So it really needs to remove that from the process. If there is a human in the loop and a pause, that is a better opportunity to use a Claude skill. And I previously hosted a session about Claude skills. I'm going to include a link to that session. Skills can be interactive. And so skills follow a sequence of steps, but may ask you for more information. And so that's different than this type of automation that runs without intervention. Another thing is that you use the same tools every time. And when I talk about tools, I'm talking about things you can connect to Claude. Like for myself, Google Drive, Airtable, Notion, might be your email, might be your, if you send out a newsletter, might be your newsletter provider, might be other tools that you just use in your day-to-day process. And you're going to connect those to Claude. And so that's part of the automation is that Claude can bring in a tool and grab details from somewhere else. Another one is that you need the same output each time. Basically, the end result is the same. And you can have Claude follow different paths in your skill. Like if this happens, do this. If this happens, do this. But it can't be something where you have to make that decision. Claude it has to follow and say, yep, I know that you need a Google Doc at the end. You need an email draft at the end. So that's part of it as well, is what is it that happens at the end of that particular automation? And then it needs to be something that happens on a set schedule. You want it to run daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, rather than on the fly. If it's on the fly, that's a skill. If it's on a schedule, that's a scheduled task. And as I mentioned, you have to have it run without intervention. So here's how Claude scheduled tasks work. There's a couple of components involved, whether you're using chat or whether you're using CoWork. A Claude scheduled task is going to call a skill file, but that's the basis. That's what you're going to start with is a skill. The skill is the step-by-step instructions that Claude needs to follow. Like first, look at my email, then determine what's new, then write a draft. That would be the skill itself. Then it might need some reference files. For example, in my email, the reference file might be a template that tells Claude exactly what the response should be. If it's tied to social media, it might be examples of social media posts so that Claude knows exactly what your voice and tone looks like for LinkedIn or Threads or Instagram. It can call external tools, doesn't have to, but that would be built into the scheduled task is what should it use and where should it pull data from? And then that you set it up. The last step is that you run it, you set up that scheduled task to run. So a skill plus a recurring date and time is a scheduled task. Chat versus CoWork. This is where things get interesting because, like I said, when I first scheduled this session, CoWork was the only option. If you wanted a scheduled task, you had to use CoWork. Now, Anthropic has introduced scheduled tasks in chat. And I'm actually in the process of migrating a ton from CoWork to chat because they don't need to run in CoWork. And I'll show you why. Chat runs entirely in the cloud. That is the biggest distinction. If every tool you connect and everything you need it to do is web-based, you can run it through chat. So my email example, that's a chat thing. It's not pulling anything locally. I have several that run through Notion, and Notion's a cloud-based product. It doesn't need anything. So those can all just run fully in chat. CoWork runs on your desktop. CoWork is a desktop application that you download from Anthropic. And so when it can, and because of that, it can write files to local folders, or it could clean up local folders, or reference local files. So if you have things in your business that are not in the cloud, then you would need to run it through CoWork instead because it's controlled. You don't give it free reign of your entire system. You say, I want you to work in this folder. and this is what you want it to do. And maybe at the end, it saves a file to that folder. That is a CoWork task. There's another instance where you might need CoWork, and that is if the tool that you're using is only available in the desktop app. When you connect a tool to Claude, it uses something called an MCP. That's just a fancy AI term for an application. And connecting the application to Claude or to ChatGPT or Gemini. A lot of companies are releasing MCPs. Sometimes the MCP is only available with CoWork. It might change in the future. The company might just be working on making it available in chat. But there are some that I use for the tools that I use. I can't do it through chat. Even though everything is web-based and I'd love to run it through chat if I could, because then I can run it on demand. But that's not an option. So that would force you to use CoWork if you realize that one of your tools is only available in CoWork. So CoWork, because of being local, when it runs a scheduled task, what's really important is your computer cannot be asleep. It can't. So I have a setting that my computer just is on awake all the time. I'm using a separate laptop, an old laptop that I don't need. And if you want to make changes to your scheduled task or to your reference files or anything, you have to go to the desktop for that. Nothing is available in the cloud. So that's a limitation of CoWork and why I'm in this process of migrating everything to chat that I can move to chat, because then I'm not tied to my physical computer if I don't need to be. But the skills directory is shared between both chat and CoWork. So let's say you have a skill file and it triages your email. You could run it in chat. You could run it in CoWork. It'll run the exact same skill. That also used to not be true. They would be stored separately. They've been combined. So now I've got some duplicates that I need to clean up. But that's important as well, is that now your skills, CoWork skills used to be saved locally, and now you can save them to the cloud. So how to set up scheduled tasks. And this is kind of the big one. So how to actually do this in both chat and CoWork. So you're going to create a Claude skill. The skill itself is the baseline. It's a set of instructions for Claude that says, first check my email, then apply some labels, then draft a response. Those are the steps that are contained within a Claude skill file for whatever you're trying to do. You'll need to gather your reference files. And I'm going to talk a little bit later in the session about where the best place to store your reference files is, like a voice and tone guide, brand guidelines, information about your business. And the skill then looks for those files. And then you're going to put your skill on a scheduled task. So I've got a demo of how this works, where to click. I pre-recorded it because, assuming you're familiar with Claude, there's always some thinking time involved. Whenever you send a command, it might think for 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and I don't like to show it live because then I have to sit with just dead space. So I've recorded myself navigating through setting up just a chat and CoWork scheduled task. Here's how you can set up scheduled tasks within Claude. In chat, you can click on Schedule and then click on New Task, Create with Claude. Claude automatically sends a prompt, but you can click Stop and type in your own text. In this case, I want to run a skill every week. So I just type in that I want to run and then backslash and select your skill. And then type in when you want it to run and send the prompt. Claude will read through the skill, and then Claude will write the text that it needs to run that skill. All you need to do is select Schedule. Then if you come over to Scheduled Tasks, You'll see the new scheduled task creative. If you needed to edit it for any reason, you can click there, change the day, the time, the frequency, or pause it. Or you could run it manually if you needed to run it outside of its schedule. For Claude CoWork, you would come over and click on Schedule, and then you'd select New Task and Create with Claude. And the biggest difference between the CoWork setup and the chat setup is that in CoWork, you can grant the task access to local files. So in this case, maybe I want the scheduled task to access Dropbox so that it can save files locally, and then the locally saved files would sync to the cloud. Otherwise, the process to set up the scheduled task is exactly the same. When you give Claude access to a local file, CoWork will prompt you to grant access if you haven't given access before. Claude will prompt you with the scheduled task, and then we'll let you know when it's done. It's a good idea to run any new scheduled tasks manually by just selecting here and selecting Run Now. You'll see them listed under Scheduled. And the reason you want to do this is because if you have anything in your scheduled task that requires you to grant permission, you can select Allow for all scheduled runs. That way, when it runs silently in the background, it doesn't get stuck because it doesn't have permission. By granting it for all scheduled runs, you won't have the issue in the future. All right. Next, I'm going to cover where to store your reference files. And the way to think about reference files is that a reference file is something that might apply to more than one skill or more than one scheduled task. So there's global information. It's information, it's templates, it's a process to follow. It's, like I mentioned, a voice and tone guide, examples of your social media, colors, fonts, all kinds of things. So there's a couple of ways to store this information. One is Google Drive. If you've granted Claude access to your Google Drive, you can say, I need you to look at this document or this template or anything like that. And if you've used chat before and used projects at all, you might be familiar with attaching Google Docs into projects. The limitation of Google Drive, at least as it exists today, is that Claude can't update Google Docs for you. You can update them, and then Claude will fetch the new information. But when I like to work in Claude, I don't want to necessarily stop. And so if I've got a change I need to make, I want Claude to just make it for me. I don't want to have to flip over to Google Drive and do that. Now, that might be your comfort level. You don't want Claude touching your Google Drive and editing things. So if that's the case, Google Drive is a great option. You can just pull in files that you may already have in your Google Drive and pull them into skills and scheduled tasks. So that's one. Really popular one that people are talking about are markdown files. You don't need to create these. Claude can make them for you. The extension is an MD file. They're really common when scheduled tasks were part of CoWork only. People would create all these different files, store them locally on computer. Claude can update the markdown files if they're stored locally on your computer because you've granted Claude access to those files. So you'll see people with, these elaborate systems of different markdown files. That works. The limitation you run into is what I mentioned previously, is that if you're not physically near that computer, you've got a problem in being able to update them. You're really attached to your computer. And I just like to work on the go. So I would get into situations where I was traveling last month, ran one of my things on the fly, but I couldn't make changes to the underlying files. So my preference is actually Notion pages. I was not a big Notion user until recently because I realized how well it would work with both chat and CoWork. Because once you connect the Notion MCP, Claude can read and write seamlessly. So you can just create a page in Notion with brand information, with social media examples. And then in that skill and in that scheduled task, say, go look at this page every time you run. And if you need to make a change, you just tell Claude to change it. So I have a huge number of Notion pages. And I've even had Claude migrate the files for me. Say, hey, look at this Google Drive file that I previously had. Now move it to Notion. And Claude will just write the new Notion page. And then I can get rid of the Google Drive if I want to keep things clean. So that's just my preference, but you do what's comfortable with you and what makes sense for your business. But basically, you need something that Claude can access to look at these different reference files. So skill is a single process, and reference files can be attached to more than one skill. Examples. So I'm going to just run through a couple of quick examples of skills I have set up and how the different pieces are connected. So one is social media post creation. This is in Claude CoWork, specifically because I use Buffer, and Buffer's MCP is only available in CoWork. That's just what it is right now. I cannot run it in chat. But it uses Claude in Chrome. It looks at recent blog posts that I've written, turns them into social media posts, looks at my voice and tone guide and examples, and it runs weekly. And so that's just something that happens. It just looks at my recent long form content and turns it into short form content. Next is branded image generation. So for me, in LinkedIn, sometimes I include an image, and I worked with a designer years ago. He created some templates for me. This one also needs to run through CoWork because CoWork is creating an image, a PNG file. It pulls data about what I want on the image from Airtable. That just happens to be where I store my in-process work. It uses its own design tools and then saves the output to Dropbox. The reason it saves it to Dropbox is it needs that local design tool in CoWork, but then it drops to Dropbox, and then that syncs to the cloud so that I can pull that file in and schedule it in my social media. So it uses my branding guidelines. This one only runs once a month. I just don't need it more frequently than that. But it gets my pre-written text from Airtable of what I want on that image, generates the branded image, and then saves the output to Dropbox. I put videos on YouTube. This runs in chat, looks at my Google Drive, looks for the video file and the transcript. It has examples of how I use a description for YouTube. And so then it writes the optimized YouTube description based on my example, and then saves the description back to Google Drive with the video. With the videos already there in a folder. And then it saves the description back so that when I'm ready to pop over to YouTube, I can just grab the description and paste, and with a couple of minor edits. And then email inbox triage. This is chat. It's connected to Gmail. I actually have 2 Gmail accounts. My secondary account is for inbound inquiries through my website. I'm just one person. I get a lot of inbound inquiries. And so Claude Chat takes the first pass, looks at what came in, classifies it into a few different types, applies a label, and then drafts a reply based on some templates. It doesn't send. I have to look at the email and edit it and send it. But it does that first pass of anything new that comes into this particular email account. After this session, I've mentioned a couple times the different things. I'm going to send you a longer list of potential scheduled tasks. I also have a guide getting started with automation, includes MCPs and AI. I'm also hosting an upcoming session on August 13th. There'll be a link you can sign up if you're interested in that. Really for people who are into idea capture. So things like bookmarking, different things you want to read later, podcasts, YouTube. You get all these ideas from all over. And how do you actually organize that system and ways to use AI to kind of filter through that? I've been a long time idea capture person, and AI has completely changed the way that I can sift through things that I've saved on the internet. So if that is something you're interested in, please sign up for that session. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day. You can check out written versions of the tutorials I create on my website, tinkeringwithideas.io. I also have a ton of free resources on Gumroad. I've got guides, worksheets, e-courses. You can check them all out at products.annabeyang.com.